Hi everybody, I am John Allen, the editor of Crux, and this is Last Week in the Church. Today is the Feast of St. Joseph. Now, under any circumstances, that would be a huge deal here in Italy. But right now, when we are in a second lockdown, the country has once again come screeching to a halt because of the coronavirus. People are making an even bigger deal out of this than normal. So, as we would say here in La Bella Roma, buona festa. Here's what we've got on today's special holiday menu. The Vatican says no to blessing gay unions. What does a papal investigation actually mean? The vicissitudes of vaccines. A Vatican trial raises more questions than it answers, and a founder defies the Pope. Those are the dishes I'm going to start serving up in just a moment, so please stick around. All right, welcome back. Please remember that you can find full coverage of all of these stories on the Crux site. That is cruxnow.com, cruxnow.com. Also, remember, if you enjoy this program, please give us a share or a like. Go in your social media platform of choice and let people know. We want to try to get the word out to as many folks as we possibly can. All right, we begin today with a response from the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that is its doctrinal watchdog agency, to what is technically known as a dubium. That's a Latin word for doubt, basically means a question that was formally submitted to it by a bishop someplace. The Vatican has not identified who this bishop was. In a moment, I'll tell you what the betting line says about at least the country we're talking about. But in any event, the question was whether it is okay for Catholic priests, Catholic bishops, Catholic clergy to offer blessings of gay unions. That is, if a gay couple gets civilly married or if they're in a relationship, they come to the church, they ask for a blessing. Is it okay to administer one? The answer that the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith gave was no, it is not appropriate. That blessings are reserved for sacramental marriages, and of course church teaching is that a sacramental marriage can occur only between a man and a woman in a commitment that is for life and that is open to new life, i.e. the prospect of children. Now, that is obviously no departure. That has been on the books since time immemorial. The Vatican has said it over and over again. The only two, I guess, question marks about this one are, number one, why now? And number two, why Pope Francis? Is it at all surprising that Pope Francis would be the one to authorize this answer? And we should say that this answer from the Congregation for the Faith was fully approved by Pope Francis. Well, in terms of why now, as I said, we don't actually know where this dubium came from, but the odds, the betting around here anyway would be, are that it may well have come from Germany. Germany is at the moment involved in what its bishops have described as a synodal process. That is not a formal synod, but a consultative process with clergy and religious and laity in Germany to try to discern a path forward, specifically from the damage of the clerical sexual abuse crisis, but more broadly where the church stands in the early 21st century. One of the issues that has arisen in Germany is precisely the church's approach to same-sex relationships, to gay unions, to gay marriages. And some in this synodal path, synodal process, have proposed blessings as a kind of compromise move between, full gay marriage, but absolutely nothing. And so this idea has been floated. It may well be that one or more bishops in Germany wanted to know whether the Vatican would be prepared to sign off on that. At least for now, the answer the Vatican has given is no. Now, in terms of why Pope Francis, is it surprising that it would be Francis to give this answer? I mean, some would answer that question in the affirmative. This, after all, is a pope who began his pontificate with that famous soundbite of "Who am I to judge?" In that case, it was specifically about gay clergy, but taken more broadly to refer to gay people generally. This is a pope who has reached out to gay people, gays and lesbians, at various points during his pontificate. And so some were a little taken aback that Pope Francis would have signed off on this. However, this really, I think, is the kind of distinctive Francis touch in miniature, right? This is not a pope who is a revolutionary when it comes to church teaching. He has affirmed the no to women priests. He has affirmed the solid no to abortion. He has affirmed a no to gay marriage. The revolution of Francis isn't at the level of doctrine, it's at the level of pastoral practice. This is a pope who wants to say, look, we may have differences on specific points, and there are some aspects of what's going on in the world today we may not be able to give a thumbs up to. That doesn't mean that we don't want to be in good, solid, loving relationships with people, even when objectively speaking, the circumstances of their lives may differ from what we would say is the moral ideal. And so in that sense, I don't think there is anything particularly surprising about Francis signing off on this. As I say, doesn't really change the status quo. This is instead a reminder that the status quo is precisely that, the status quo. All right, secondly, what does a papal investigation actually mean? This week it was reported, and I emphasize reported, not announced, because the Vatican never announced this, but it was reported by an Italian newspaper and has subsequently made the rounds, that Pope Francis has ordered an apostolic visitation of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and the Discipline of the Sacraments. That's the Vatican department that sets policy on liturgy. So like how the Mass should be celebrated, how the various sacraments should be celebrated, and so on. Now, it has been emphasized that this is not a canonical visitation. Usually a canonical visitation happens when some crisis has erupted, there's some scandal going on, and the Vatican needs to clean house. This is instead being described as an informal visitation to help Pope Francis decide who he thinks ought to head this department and what its vision ought to be going forward. Now, the question of who should head it is open because last month, Pope Francis accepted the resignation of Cardinal Sarah of Guinea, who had been head of this department for the last 5 years, almost 6, and it was sort of, it raised some eyebrows because frankly, Cardinal Sarah was seen as one of the few sort of strong conservatives in a senior leadership position in the Vatican. And during his term of office, he was sometimes seen as taking positions that, if not at odds with the Pope, at least provided a kind of alternative emphasis, an alternative note from some of the things that the Pope and his closest allies were saying. So there is a vacancy. Pope Francis, by all accounts, is not particularly an adept when it comes to liturgy, never been a particular passion of his. And so the benign reading of all of this is simply that the Pope recognizes that he has to make some important decisions about a department that's in charge of a field he doesn't know particularly well, and so he's looking for another set of eyes. He wants some background. In other words, you could see this as a kind of routine administrative maneuver. The conclusion would be nothing to see here. As I say, that's one way of looking at it. It is certainly not the way everyone is looking at it. I would say more conservative voices in the liturgical field, liturgical traditionalists for sure, look at this through a hermeneutic of suspicion. They would point out that the Pope never convened an apostolic visitation of any other Vatican department before he named new leadership, so why this one? They would also, I think, have a degree of suspicion that perhaps what's really going on here is that Pope Francis, having gotten rid of Cardinal Sarah, now wants to know who are the Sarah loyalists left at the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and wants to sort of clean house so that a new leader more in sync with his own vision and his own agenda won't be hobbled by internal resistance from his own staff. In other words, They would suggest this is an exercise in figuring out who the blues and the grays are and getting rid of the grays, basically. Now, which of these two interpretations is closer to the truth? Only time will tell. If other exits from the congregation for divine worship begin to happen, that would probably skew in the direction of the more cynical or skeptical perspective. But in any event, what we know is that a papal review of a Vatican department, which not quite unprecedented, but certainly unusual, is currently taking place. Drama surrounds why it's happening and what its outcome may be. All right, third, the vicissitudes of vaccines. Of course, the rollout of the COVID vaccines continue to take place around the world. In Europe, we hit a glitch in the last few days. The administration of the AstraZeneca vaccine was suspended because of concerns about a couple of deaths that had taken place that may or may not have been related to the vaccine. Yesterday, the European Medical Agency ruled that the AstraZeneca vaccine is perfectly safe. Today, in both Germany and Italy, administration of the vaccine is continuing. In the meantime, there continues to be debate in Catholic circles about the moral legitimacy of these vaccines, because some of them in the testing phase, others in the production phase, rely on cell lines that were derived from the tissues of aborted fetuses, generally in the 1960s or 1970s. This week on the Crux site, I had an interview with a very prominent Filipino moral theologian and also microbiologist, Father Nicanor Austriaco, who argues that this debate, which is concentrated principally in the United States, he argues that it is irresponsible because he says that in the developing world, such as his native Philippines, what's going on here is not merely an effort to save lives, it's also an effort to save livelihoods, that the economic consequences of the coronavirus have been crippling for the poorest of the poor, that we are talking about shifting massive numbers of people from being poor to being ultra poor, that the vaccine is the only exit strategy we've got, and that therefore he regards this American Catholic speculation about remote cooperation in a past evil as largely counting angels on the heads of a pin and irresponsible. It is an interesting perspective and a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, that in the 21st century we live in a church in which more than 2/3 of our membership is outside Europe and the United States. It's in the developing world. By the middle of this century, that share will be 3/4. And if we want to be Catholic in the 21st century, that is, we want to be universal, we have to think beyond the contours of debates in Europe and the United States. We have to open ourselves to the voices of the global church. Perhaps the vaccine debate is an opportunity, perhaps even an invitation to do that in the here and now. All right, fourth, a Vatican trial is currently raising more questions than it answers. We have talked before on this program about a sex abuse trial currently going on in the Vatican Criminal Court, the Vatican Tribunal. It's a highly unusual case because it involves an accusation by one minor, that is, a minor at the time of the abuse, that he was abused by another minor at the time of the alleged abuse. These are two former pre-seminarians in a Vatican pre-seminary, the pre-seminary of St. Pius X. It's a residence for young men, usually junior high, high school age, who are considering an eventual vocation to the priesthood. It's an opportunity for them to get some spiritual formation and some experience, I guess, of just the clerical lifestyle. The claim to fame of this particular pre-seminary is that it supplies all the altar boys for St. Peter's Basilica. So a few years ago, one of the pre-seminarians at this place, who was only been identified by the initials LG, that's in keeping with Italian and Vatican law of protecting the identities of alleged abuse victims, claimed that a slightly older, less than a year really, a slightly older pre-seminarian who since has been ordained a priest, Don Gabriele Martinelli of the Diocese of Como, that this guy abused him. This week, we finally heard from the alleged victim, LG, who testified for about 3 hours, with a break of a half hour in the middle. He described in graphic detail the way this alleged abuse is supposed to have occurred in his room at the pre-seminary. However, defense attorneys obviously attempted to knock it down. Their suggestion was that there are a number of inconsistencies in the timeline sketched by LG, and also painted a picture of a largely consensual relationship. Thing of it is, what we now know in this trial is that we are in uncharted territory when a 13 or 14-year-old is claiming that he was sexually abused by a 14 or 15-year-old, when there are no direct eyewitnesses to this alleged abuse, where the accounts have the surface appearance of credibility, but on the other hand, there are also inconsistencies in the timeline and stern denials from the other principal in the case. What do? We don't know. That is the dilemma that the Vatican court is currently wrestling with. It's going to be very interesting to see how this trial plays out as it goes forward. All right, finally, a founder defies the Pope. The celebrated monastic community of Beauvais has been in turmoil for the last several years, ever since a Vatican visitation ended with a decision that its legendary founder, lay Italian monk Enzo Bianchi, needed to resign as the leader of the community, and he needed to physically remove himself from the environment. The Vatican thought it had a deal to do that in 2017. Bianchi never left. Recently, it reactivated momentum to trying to get that done. Thought it had to deal for Bianchi to move on before Lent. Again, Bianchi refused to go. Bianchi recently posted a somewhat testy blog post in which he claimed that he was basically sandbagged by the Vatican. That is, he'd agreed to move to another property with a few loyalists, few members of his community who wanted to go with him. But he's claiming the Vatican, without any discussion, imposed the requirement that those members of the community who went with him would have to renounce their monastic vows. They basically would be out of the community. Bianchi is claiming that was never the deal. And so he's saying, basically, I'm not going anywhere, and you can't make me. Now, in that negotiation prior to Lent, Pope Francis had personally intervened. And this week, Pope Francis sent a letter to members of the community saying, look, don't be discouraged. Don't let all this question your vocation, question the importance of what you're doing. It's precious. It's valuable in the eyes of God. You'll get through this. What all this raises are two very interesting points. One, Pope Francis's hands-on approach to this kind of thing. This is one community, admittedly tremendously symbolically important in the ecumenical field, but nevertheless, the Pope is twice now involved himself in what, some people would argue is fairly small potatoes. It's ultimately one guy and the question of where he chooses to live. But Pope Francis is not one to delegate in this kind of set of circumstances. From the beginning, he has been a very hands-on manager. That is both a great strength and a great weakness. The great strength is nobody can claim the Pope doesn't know what's going on. He does. The weakness is nobody can say it's somebody else's fault because when you're a hands-on manager, ultimately, if whatever you're doing doesn't work, there's nobody else to take responsibility. The other interesting point this raises is despite the mythology that the Pope is an absolute monarch who can just press a button in Rome and make anything in the Catholic Church he wants to happen in the blink of an eye, it just ain't so. In this case, he can't even get a founder of a papally recognized monastery out of a property that is papally owned and sponsored. The thing is, yes, popes are infallible when they pronounce on faith and morals. Yes, popes enjoy, according to canon law, full, supreme, universal, and immediate jurisdiction. That, however, in a euro in Rome, often will get you a cappuccino. If a guy is determined to drag in his heels and play out the string, look, Pope Francis eventually will prevail, but Bianchi is basically calling his bluff. He's saying, do you want to send in the papal gendarmes and drag me kicking and screaming out of here? Do you want that visual? If not, maybe you need to play ball. Remains to be seen, but it just goes to show that, a pope is the big boss, but in this system, even the big boss has limits. All right, that is our show for this week. Thank you for being with us. We will be here next Friday, as always, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, please go on the Crux site, cruxnow.com. That is cruxnow.com. Check out our full coverage of all these stories and much more beyond. We're in the middle of our online fundraising drive. If you can make a small, stable, monthly commitment to keeping Crux going, to keeping us independent, we would be extraordinarily grateful. Also, give us a thumbs up for this show. Give us a like. Give us a retweet or whatever is in your social media wheelhouse. We would deeply appreciate that as well. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, have a fantastic and blessed week. Buona festa di San Giuseppe, and we will talk to you again soon.